Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are talking about an important characteristics of pastoralism, which is mobility. Once again, good morning, everyone. I'm going to share with you the policy framework for pastoralism in Africa. The future and the challenges of pastoralism in Africa has already been touched upon by Professor Jeremy Swift. But we're talking about extreme and worsening levels of poverty and food insecurity, which is very common among pastoral communities. Political and economical marginalization. Madam Mosca touched upon the fact that the pastoral communities are not marginal in terms of number, yes, but in terms of responses, policy responses, they constitute a very marginalized segment of the population. Environmental degradation and dwindling access to resources, uneven market relationships and increased pressure on fragile ecosystems, exposure to climate risks, diseases. And I think I must underline on the fact that there is a lot of conflict and insecurity in those areas. So that is one part of the equation. The second part of the equation is that the responses designed to address some of these challenges have been inadequate, largely, in terms of inadequacy of frameworks, governance frameworks, institutional settings, the policy biases against pastoralists, development policies, trade policies. They do not take into account the future of pastoralist communities, and that's partly why they do not feature very well in the statistics, in the official statistics, which Professor Jeremy Swift has alluded to. Ineffective interventions because of the irrelevance of those interventions in the first place, because they do not reflect the realities and circumstances faced by pastoralists. The pastoral policy initiative arose from the need to address some of these gaps. It was a joint initiative of the AU Commission and UN OCHA for the development of a Pan-African policy framework for pastoralism. It was formally launched in July 2007. Professor Swift was, from the records, one of the participants of that workshop. The objective was to develop a policy framework that will help in promoting development processes that address the peculiar challenges and needs of pastoral communities. Now, we set a goal for ourselves when we engage in this activity to develop a policy framework. We believed that the policy framework should serve as an advocacy tool for promoting the development and improvement of pastoral communities. It should also serve as a mechanism through which matters that affect pastoralist life and livelihood find official recognition. And it should aim at securing and protecting the rights of pastoral people. The policy framework should lay the foundation for the continent-wide commitment to political, social, and economic development of pastoral communities. The policy framework should provide the pastoral people with open space for the definition and management of their own development activities. And it should make it possible for appropriate interventions to address the natural, physical, anthropogenic problems of pastoral communities. And finally, it should create and expand economic opportunities for pastoral people. So this was the set of goals that we wanted the policy framework to address. Well, this is the process of development. We were led by a specialist task force that was set up to, provide a kind of quality assurance to the process, but also serve as an interface between the technical process as well as the political setting of the initiative. Now, it has gone through the policy formulation and adoption process, has gone through a process, a very distinct process, which has been analytical as well as engaging, participatory. The regional assessment indicated the situation on the ground, the assessment of situation on the ground at the regional level, which led to defining elements of the draft policy framework, which in turn led to the preparation of the draft policy framework through stakeholders' consultations based on those regional assessment reports, and therefore validation through, again, consultation of the draft policy framework, which was submitted to the member states, both as expert and then ministerial level in October 2010, to examine and approve the pastoral framework. Ministers of Agriculture were the ones who considered this draft and approved, and made recommendation for the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government to adopt a decision on pastoralism in Africa, which they adopted it in February last year. And of course, the next step is going to be policy implementation. How can we use this policy instrument to assist member states, regional economic communities, and other stakeholders to use the pastoral, the framework, the policy framework, to develop and review their respective policies. Now, this is a process. The regional assessments were undertaken between 2008 and 2010. It was approved by the Ministerial Conference in October 2010, and there was a ministerial resolution on pastoralism in Africa, which was subsequently approved by the Executive Council of the AU, which is the ministers, the foreign affairs ministries, in January 2011, which led to the adoption of a decision on Africa's pastoralism by AU Heads of State and Government Assembly in February 2011. Now, briefly, very briefly, in terms of content, the AU policy framework for pastoralism has chapters. The first one analyzes pastoralism in context. It conceptualizes pastoralism using three important pillars. First and foremost, it's about the people. Then the economic resources, which comprise livestock mainly, and the natural resources upon which this livelihood is based. And taking mobility as defining characteristics, Mr. Chairman, that is where I borrowed the concept of mobility for me to move from that to come here and present this. It describes the context, the geographical, ecological, economic, socio-cultural context surrounding the pastoralism. It then describes this pastoralism interface with policy in Africa, and outlines the colonial legacy and the post-colonial policy environment, as well as the contemporary pastoral policy development challenges, including conflict, as I mentioned earlier, demography, the global trends, and probes the implication of all of this for pastoral development process. What is the meaning of all this for the future? The framework has a set of principles and objectives and strategies. The principles include recognizing the rights of pastoralists. Any pastoral policy should start by recognizing the rights of pastoralists and engaging pastoralists in political and policy processes. Also recognizing pastoralism as a way of life and a production system. The importance of strategic mobility. The importance of regional approaches, because in many regions of Africa, the political boundaries would make little sense for pastoralists, and therefore any strategic response should take into account that kind of regional approaches. The case of, for example, livestock diseases is an example. Managing risks and acknowledging and building on existing policy processes. Already there is a lot on the ground, and there is no need for starting from zero all the time. And the need for updating the policy framework on a regular basis to make it relevant. The policy framework revolves around two main objectives. And this is related to the pillars which I had mentioned earlier. The first one is really about securing and protecting the lives, livelihoods and rights of pastoral people. So it's about the people, first and foremost, and ensure continent-wide commitment to political, social and economic development of pastoral communities and pastoral areas. And the second one is about the dominant economic activity on which pastoralism is based, and that is livestock. So it's about reinforcing the contribution of pastoral livestock wealth to national, regional and continent-wide economies. So the pastoral policy framework hinges on these two interrelated objectives, and specific strategies were outlined to address the two objectives. For example, the strategies to achieve Objective 1 include recognition of the role of pastoralism, demonstrating commitment to pastoral policy development, integrating pastoral issues into decision-making processes, acknowledging the legitimacy of indigenous pastoral institutions, strengthening the role and rights of women in pastoral communities, mainstreaming pastoral issues in poverty reduction programs, service delivery issues, including health, education, and so on. So the actual work of translating these strategies into concrete results is, it remains a challenge. For the second objective that focuses on livestock as an economic activity, it's about pastoral rangeland governance, the issue of governance, the policy support to mobility within and between countries. If we say mobility characterizes pastoralism, how can we support that process? How can we facilitate in terms of policy? Protecting pastoral livestock assets, the issue of property rights and so on. Marketing of pastoral livestock and products. Financial and insurance services that are tailored to pastoral areas. And protecting African genetic resources, animal and plant genetic resources, and the importance of research and extension. Now, the last aspect is applying the policy framework. How do we now use this, which is a very important instrument to deliver results on those goals? Initiation of pastoral policy development is the initial step, and there are key steps in pastoral policy development. The strategies for pastoral policy development, including the roles, indigenous institutions, consultations, legal framework, resources, communication, all these are very important, but then it should lead to implementation. And also a mechanism should be laid out for tracking progress in policy development and implementation. Now, very briefly about the decision on Africa's pastoralism. This is an AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government decision. And what does it say? Okay, it takes note of this initiative, it approves the recommendation of the ministers and urges member states to review their policies impacting pastoralism in accordance with the policy framework with a view to developing comprehensive policy which take into account the peculiar needs of pastoralism and to build adequate human, financial and technical capacities to support pastoral policy development, implementation and tracking progress. And the Executive Council, the Ministers of Foreign Affairs decide to encourage pastoral networks and groups to initiate regional and continental forums. And I think this is very important. The decision does not give any mandate to AUC or regional economic communities to set up pastoral networks on behalf of pastoralists. It encourages pastoral networks themselves to, and groups to initiate regional and continental forums. Like we have a Pan-African Farmers Forum, which was created by farmers groups and organizations, which the AU Commission has assisted. Which would facilitate engagement with regional economic communities, the Commission of the African Union, other relevant AU organs and partners, and so on. It requests the Commission of the African Union and regional economic communities and partners to strengthen and establish an appropriate institutional framework. Now, this was the gap identified to establish or strengthen an appropriate institutional framework, to provide coordination of follow-up activities and facilitate mutual learning by member states as they develop or review their pastoral policies in accordance with the framework. The African Union Commission has an office in Nairobi. It's called the Inter-Africa Bureau for Animal Resources with continental mandates. We as a Commission have assigned that office to provide this framework, this institutional framework. And they have started work in that regard. The decision also requests the Commission and so on to put in place appropriate measures for mobilization of financial resources and partnerships in support of promoting pastoral policy development and implementation, and to take appropriate measures for the establishment of mechanisms for progress tracking and periodic member state reporting on progress achieved. At the end of the day, it is the member states who are responsible for implementing, coming up with policy development at national level and implementing it. We are talking about a decision now here requesting member states to periodically review and report on a regular basis on progress achieved, and also request to support pastoral groups and networks in their efforts to initiate regional and continental pastoral forums, and request the Commission of the African Union to report regularly on the implementation of this decision. In other words, the Commission, which I represent, is required to report to the Assembly of Heads of State and Government on a regular basis on progress of implementation of this particular decision. This is, in short, the highlights of the policy framework and the decisions. I understand that you have a copy of the policy framework document. You can have a look at some of the more details there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.